Welcome back, folks, to the Rebel Edge. I am John Najarian. Pete, co-host Pete Najarian, former, God, the introduction of you, Pete, would take forever. Former All-American at the University of Minnesota, pro ball player for the Seattle Seahawks, Minnesota Vikings, Tampa Bay Bucks, LA Raiders, not
Las Vegas,
Oakland or Las Vegas, Sacramento Surge.
And Canada, John. I was up in Canada for a little while. I mean, that counts, right? I mean, what the hell?
What was that? Wasn't, let me see, is that Toronto?
Yeah, the Toronto Argonauts. I spent a couple of games with them as well, just to kind of even it all out.
And why not? But, folks, we appreciate you tuning in to the Rebel's Edge. Again, John Najarian, Pete Najarian. That's how you can find us on Twitter, too, at PETENAJARIAN. And I'm just JON, same last name, Najarian. Pete, let's kick it off with Musk. Why not? Because it not only is a top story, but it influences both Twitter and Tesla shares because Musk apparently decides no mas. He wants to step away. He said there's too damn many bots. What's your take?
I agree with them. And you and I both know this, John. We know that there's a lot of people out there, and we know a lot of them in different media aspects that are absolutely involved in the world of buying bots. So it looks like they have more followers, and it's all BS. We both know that. So, it's something that Elon's well aware of. He's not a fool. And by the way, one of the things that makes me know that he knows a little bit more than most is Jack Dorsey, right? I mean, there's a relationship there as well. So, John, I think he makes a good point where he says, well, they say it's about 5%. Elon guesses it's somewhere closer to 20% being bots. And I think the reality is it could be a lot bigger number than that. There are some out there who will go all the way up towards half being bots. So whatever the number is, I guess the biggest pushback that Elon certainly has, John, is he doesn't think it's 5%. He doesn't think that the advertisers, even if they think it's something a little bit north of that, he doesn't know that they know exactly where that north of that is. So we're talking about daily active users, monthly active users, and all the things, the metrics that people talk about. I'm not so sure how accurate that is, John. I don't know. What do you say?
Well, I think, Pete, that if the board and the CEO knowingly said something false in a statement that is published and is part of the SEC, once it becomes a record of that publicly traded company, they're in big trouble. Yeah. So if they don't know for sure that it's 5% or less, they shouldn't say that. Right. And indeed, if Elon wants to walk away, I think he'll be able to. But this is going to play out in the courts if they're so bold. But I think they have a real risk of going to court with Elon on this one, Pete. So I would be betting on Elon, as I usually would, rather than on Twitter and the board there. But this will be an interesting story going forward.
And oh, by the way, one last thing, just to go a little bit long, because the next one we can go a little bit shorter. But I will say this as well, John. How about the fact that his sells to put him into position to buy Twitter actually were somewhere close to $1,000, anywhere between $900 and $1,000, give or take, let's say. Not so bad, because when you look at where the stock is now, if he wanted to, he could buy back his own shares, pay the $1 billion that he would owe them. He'd still be up a lot more than a couple of $1 billion on top of that. Next, we're going to talk about inflation and what's going on. Now, we all know how bad those numbers were, John, and it's not just gas. We all focus on crude and everything else, but it's gas and food specifically that people have been talking about more and more about what's going on there, and we've heard the Fed talking about it as well. What is your thoughts right now, John? Because we've got a huge day on Wednesday talking about what's going on with inflation.
Yeah, and that's the CPI, folks. It comes our way at 8:30 Eastern time on the 13th of July. So that is a huge market-moving event. More important than JP Morgan's earnings or anything else this week, in my opinion. So what we're going to be looking for, Pete, is do they post up another surprisingly hot number? If they do, it's going to be really tough for the Fed not to put 75 basis points more on the board for their, I think it's July 25th meeting, Pete. So I know that we've seen gasoline prices come down by maybe 20, 30 cents. Most of that is the taxes that are being suspended for a while. I don't think the consumer is feeling any better about higher food, higher gas prices. But that'll be what they do. As far as CPI, that's the impact that's hitting them. And I think that's going to be something that is going to be causing them to cut back on spending elsewhere and or trading down, like we've said, to Dollar Tree, Dollar General, and things like that.
And the last thing I'd also just mention, John, is when you look, I mean, some of the others that are struggling out there, and we talk about food, but a lot of the time we convert that over, oh, well, at the grocery store. It affects a lot more than just that. It's McDonald's, it's Wendy's, it's just about everything out there. So when you're talking about inflation and some of the problems is, okay, well, you can only allocate so much money because you've only got so much money. So you're going to the gas pump, now you go to the grocery store, and then people want to go out, they want to get their drinks, they want to get their fast food, but can they still afford it? And that's going to be a real problem, I think, going forward.
Absolutely. All right. So Amazon Prime Day, Pete. We kick it off tomorrow, and it's actually several days. It's not just one day. And it's not just Amazon that does this, but Amazon started it, kicked it off well before the back-to-school season because it was kind of in the doldrums of summer, and it worked out for them. They put a bunch of Amazon stuff on sale. So like that Echo Dot or any of these things that might be in your home with Amazon Fire Stick and all that kind of stuff, they put those on deep discounts. Why? Because we'll buy more on Amazon because of it. But I know you're focused in on, Pete, all the people that compete against Amazon, Target, Walmart, Best Buy, and all those guys, because they don't just let them have it. They want a piece of it too. So they've joined in, right?
Yeah, they're not stupid. They understand what's going on, and they know that if they're going to have to go up against the competition is Amazon. It's why places like Target bought Shipped, and it's why Walmart and everybody else has had to pivot and move around a little bit, and they're going to compete. And I think they can compete pretty well, John. We learned that as we were getting deeper and deeper into the pandemic over the last couple of years. I thought that was a really great move, and it showed you the forward thinking that Target had. Target's biggest problem this past quarter was that they came out there and there were items that they bought that they basically just couldn't sell. Deep discount, get rid of it. It's going to affect for the next quarter, but that's okay. They're looking forward to the end of the year where they're going to get rid of some of that kind of stuff and be able to get back to doing what Target does, what Walmart does, what Best Buy does, to be able to compete against Amazon. So as I look ahead to that, I think that there's going to be a lot of great competition, and I think that we're going to be online a lot over the next couple of days. I have no doubts about that.
Right. And just a quick pitch for my buddy Jack Carr, Pete, and Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt's starring in The Terminal List. If you guys haven't seen that yet, check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. It rocks. That's a great series. I love it. All right. What about Strong Dollar, Pete?
Yeah, strong dollar. People think it sounds great, right? Oh gosh, we got the strong dollar. This is the greatest thing in the world. Well, it kind of is, kind of isn't. And all you've got to do is look at these corporations, whether it's Apple or anybody else, especially technology related, because so much of what they do, John, is overseas. I think that Apple these days is actually over 60%. If I'm not wrong, I believe it's 62% of what they make is international. And because of that, now you've got the strong dollar, and it sounds great until you find out that, you know what, I've got to compete when I go to China, when I go to Japan, when I go to all these other parts of the world. I've got to be able to compete with what we're selling. It means they need a little bit more money because of the fact that the strong dollar. So there's a whole confused thing going on here. And, you know, it sounds great, and we are in a completely different environment than a lot of parts of the rest of the world. But this is going to be an impact, and it's not going to be the biggest impact in the world. But when you talk about 1, 2, or 3% or 4% or whatever it might end up being for somebody like Apple or Microsoft, John, those are big numbers. When we're talking about in the billions and billions of dollars that these guys are making per quarter, this is going to be an impact, and it's going to be something that's going to be felt by very, very many of those that actually do have this huge international exposure.
Absolutely. And Pete, you mentioned Japan briefly in there. Keep in mind, folks, that Japan is the number 4 largest economy in the world. You know, you take the Eurozone and China as number 2 and 3 behind the U.S. Japan would be number 4 then. And we've got a recession going on in Europe. I'm convinced of that. Japan, their yen is so weak right now that everything they buy in dollar terms is much higher. That's why we bring it up, folks. All right. Take a look, Pete, at unusual option activity.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't trade options, if it's call activity, that's bullish. If it's put activity, that's bearish. You don't have to trade options to be able to focus in on these, but we bring them to you because Halliburton, which is a big oil service stock, meaning that they're not like ExxonMobil. They're not the person that pulls it out of the ground. They're the people that build the infrastructure to let ExxonMobil, Chevron, all these guys, just like Schlumberger, pull that energy out of the ground. And so, Pete, I saw 10,000 of the 29th of July 30 calls changing hands with the stock at 29 bucks. So to me, somebody who does trade options, that means they're betting on the upside of that particular stock, Halliburton, HAL. And whether you play it with options or whether you buy the stock, it's a bullish trade. And I think after the correction that energy's made, it's a smart trade.
Yeah, I got a bullish one as well, John, because I'm looking at Upstart. Now, this is a name that a lot of people are probably not familiar with, but it's a cloud name and they're involved in the lending process and all the rest of it. But it's also a stock that's absolutely been clobbered. I mean, we're talking about, this is one of those names that everybody loved it when it was over 100. And now it's trading well below 100. And matter of fact, it's trading 28 bucks. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of the beating that this company has taken. But somebody thinks there's a little bit of something, some light at the end of the tunnel here in July, because they're looking at the July 30 calls, John. About 9,500 of those were bought, 50 cents up to $1 there. They were also buying at the same time 6,000 of the July 31 calls for about 60 cents or so. So somebody out there seems to think that this thing is ready to make a little bit of a turn to the upside, not a dramatic run, not 10 bucks, not any of that type of thing, but at least some upside move after getting absolutely pounded to the downside. That's an interesting one for me as well. I love the cloud space. I think there's a lot going on in the lending world as well. And I think this name actually was a solid name, but it probably was a little too lofty. And now at these levels, somebody thinks that it actually has a shot to the upside.
Yep. And AI, artificial intelligence, is how they do what they do. Instead of having a bunch of loan officers look at it, this is based on AI. So watch that one. I like the company, Pete. Novak Djokovic, I want to just throw out a quick one about sports, Pete, because Novak Djokovic won Wimbledon, of course, just over the weekend. Fabulous tennis player. A lot of controversy this year because he, of course, was going to play in Australia. And then they said, no, you can't play in Australia because they had the lockdowns about COVID and he wasn't going to take the vaccine. He's not going to take the vaccine to come into the U.S. either, Pete.
Right.
So unless we release that, unless we say you don't have to have the vaccine to come to America, he's not going to be playing in the U.S. Open. And he is, or was, one of the #1 tennis players in the world. But because he's not taken that vaccine, Pete, he's dropped down to, I think it's either number 4 or 7, because they don't think he's going to be there for that tournament.
Well, he did drop down, John, but after this win, I think he popped right back up. I think he's #1 again. I mean, this guy is a total stud. He watches his diet. He does all the things that somebody like him have to do because he's no longer a young tennis player. This guy's won 21 Grand Slams. He's had 4 Wimbledons in a row. So this guy is absolutely the man these days in tennis, and everybody's looking at him. He's the Michael Jordan right now of tennis, John, because he leads it all, but he makes his own decisions as well, and everybody has that right. So he's made his decisions, what he wants to do, and he's handled himself very, very nicely. He's not been critical. He's not been too brutal about what he has to say politically and all the rest of it, but he only plays when he's ready to play. Next one, John, real quick. We got to talk about the home run derby. Tell me what you think, because I heard Giancarlo Stanton really wants in on this whole thing. I think that makes it pretty fun when you get some of those Yankees in there that are these guys, he and Aaron Judge. Have you ever seen physical specimens like these guys in your life? I mean,
no.
When they get up to the plate, they look like something different than a baseball player normally looks. I mean, these guys are big, they're shredded, they're strong. They have incredible athleticism. I was lucky enough to be at a Twins game against the Yankees a few years ago. Of course, the Twins lost. It was a playoff game. They got whooped pretty good, actually. But those guys are the kind of guys that people want to have in their hitting. But what do you think about this home run derby? Because a lot of people are kind of scared about it because guys can get hurt. They're going to swing for the fences. That's what they're doing. And maybe they get injured. What do you think about this whole thing?
They're not going to get injured. And they have a great time. The fans love it. It's a week from today, Pete. So Monday next week is when the home run derby is. All-Star games the next night. I think this is something the fans love to see. The players, you can see the big smiles on their faces and things. They take it seriously, but they'll put their hat on backwards. They'll be up there just, swinging easy. And I wouldn't worry about the getting hurt part. But I will say that Aaron Judge, in my opinion, Pete, that's the guy to beat. He is one of the best I've ever seen at the plate. Bat speed, everything else, phenomenal. Just a strong kid and very well spoken about the game and staying in great shape too.
I'll give you one last one that I'm going to do a shout out because he's not going to be in the All-Star game. He's not in that category, but a friend of mine, one of my best friends in college, he lived across the dorm from me, Dave Puck. He's got a son named AJ Puck. He's 6'7", 255-pound pitcher for the Oakland A's. And I'll tell you what, the kid can throw the heat, John. He's not in the All-Star game. He's not a part of that whole thing, but I'll tell you what, it's great to see a buddy's kid playing in a game, in the bigs and having a great time. And he's doing exactly that. So look out for this kid, AJ Puck, P-U-K. Keep an eye on him.
All right. And folks, remember our Twitter handles at Pete Najarian, at JON Najarian. Shoot us some love, shoot us some questions. In coming weeks, we'll be able to address some of those. So if you've got a question about the Rebels Edge, Market Rebellion, the market in general, shoot those questions into us and we'll get them on the show. Have a great week, everybody. Pete and I will see you next Monday.
See ya.